All right, more than 30 heads of state and top officials from the European Union, invited guest countries, 14 heads of international organization are expected to attend the G20 summit. UK PM Rishi Sunak is already here. Japanese PM also has arrived in Delhi. Remember, the G20 is primarily an economic grouping of 20 biggest developed as well as developing economies under India's presidency. Issues that are likely to come up for discussion include cryptocurrency regulation, the multilateral development bank reforms, furthering digital public infrastructure, climate financing, formulating common debt relief framework for distressed countries. All of that likely to be a part of the agenda. To discuss that and more, joining me is my colleague Rakesh Kharsa. Please grace us with your presence here in the News9 studio. Let me also call upon my colleague Krishnakumar to join us perhaps and be a part of this discussion where we are hoping to, please do walk in, Krishna, wherever you find space and time from.
Please.
And let me, hi sir, good to have you back, sir.
Yeah. Welcome, Krishna.
Right. It's the eve of the mega, much-awaited summit under India's presidency, under India's leadership. Host of leaders are already here in the national capital. There is this, I think, excitement bubbling in the air. You know, I think we can all feel it around us since we're here at the heart of all of it. What are you hoping for? What are your big expectations?
Thank you, Shweta. First of all, it's like that big ticket Indian cultural perspective where we say beti ki shaadi hai.
Okay.
So in that sense, the whole nation is out in terms of, Delhi is all dressed up and decked up to receive the heads of states, and many of them have already come in. What is happening is that, I like the Foreign Affairs Minister, and many of us like him for one-liners. They're very impactful one-liners. So I was just thinking about that one very, very impactful line he made a few months ago in a press conference. He said the idea is to take India to the world and bring world to India.
Right.
So G20 presidency under India, that one line sums up the entire sentiment.
Okay, the world is here.
The world is here. And consequently,
okay,
as a positive corollary, we are taking India to the world.
Absolutely.
So in that sense, it's a big ticket sentiment. See, we have to be a little realistic. I keep saying this. I'm not undermining the importance of a joint communication and all that, which is the order of the day. But let's not get too, so to say, overboard on signing of an agreement, which is important. There should be deliverables. There should be an outcome orientation in all our conversations. At that level, outcomes are very, very important. But from India's perspective, the fact that so many, leaders coming here and they're soaking in the India sentiment or the India movement, that is a big takeaway for the domestic and international audience. The whole world is bullish on India. Let's have no doubt on that. If you see that from an IMF to a Morgan Stanley to a World Bank to, Goldman Sachs, and yesterday the Harvard Business Review report I was reading, I mean, there isn't a soul who is not bullish on India. Not that we don't have challenges, but let's be cognizant of the reality that India is one big bright spot in the global economic arena. The context to that comes from the fact that when we set off in 2023, the same IMF pointed out that India and China would corner about 50% of the growth, which was an admission that the entire West is, so to say, in a dim state in terms of growth prospect. And now what has happened is that in the last 8 months, China is imploding. So it's all eyes are on India. So there's a huge sense of expectation, expectancy, also a huge sense of responsibility. That means we need to not only sustain the movement, to build the momentum, we have also to be very, very careful about, not making any mistake at this stage. So I think G20, coming back to the
agenda. I like
agenda,
how you're cautiously optimistic.
We have to be cautiously
optimistic. We often hear RBI governor saying those words. But I like your tone of being cautious and not spoiling the party.
Yeah, because I'm cognizant of the fact that, if we pin down G20 outcome to a joint communique, which is unlikely on key issues.
Very unlikely.
Because the Chinese are not here, the Russians
are not here.
The heads of states have to sign that joint communique.
Right.
I see that as a hindrance. And why they didn't come, that is the origin of the hindrance. So in that sense,
and there's a lot of geopolitics.
There's a lot of geopolitics. See, and G20 also, as someone rightly pointed, it's not one common tent. The tent is common, but within the tent right now is New Delhi.
Divided fractions.
It's a fractious group, and it has a noble intent. But if you look back at all G20s that have happened in the recent past, the outcomes are very low, I think, on sentiment, on emotion, and the need to be together. That need to be together to solve larger problems of the world, which you identified in your opening remarks. I don't think that has been felt more strongly than ever before than in India today.
Absolutely.
And on agenda, 3 or 4 very, very important issues. I think India's export, as we keep saying, digital public infrastructure goods, climate financing, our push for reforming the debt infrastructure, which is a difficult challenge. But tomorrow and day after is the big day. And we must also simultaneously not lose track of the fact that there are bilateral meetings. So the G20 multilateral forum has given us a great opportunity to also be one-on-one with the big ticket, Western leaders led by the US president.
Right, big ticket Western leaders, all of them here in India. Let's quickly, for the benefit of our viewers, take them through what's on the agenda as far as the economic agenda is concerned. Now that we have set the ball rolling for what the expectations are, why is India dressed or decked like a bride? Let's also talk about what's on the economic agenda. A joint communique may not be likely, but India is going to push for a lot of bilateral ties. It's going to push for regulations, framework of regulations. Krishna, what's going to be the big agenda?
Right. To start it off, at the end of the day, something like the G20 summit in India hosting it, I would call it like hosting like the Olympics of geopolitics.
Okay.
So, and only that it's even more rare that, India gets a presidency like this of the top 20 countries in the world, US, Russia, China, you name the biggest powers in the world, they're going to be there. And India hosting it is a moment in history for India. It's a rival on the global stage as a superpower, and it's a great posturing for what it's actually, what India has been for the last decade or so, the kind of growth it has put up. So in a situation like that, where so much of economic progress is what India has pushed India into this presidency as well of G20, crypto regulations and reforms on MDB, which is the multilateral development banks, are two things that India has been talking about a lot. It's been part of the so-called stated agenda, if I may. We're yet to get the final agenda. So these two will be keenly looked at, Shweta. One is how do we regulate cryptocurrency across the world? Conversations on that. I don't know they'll arrive with the final regulations, but definitely that will be an important conversation that will be had over there. And apart from that, at a time when there's questions on the relevance of the IMF and the World Bank, especially when it comes to dispersing credit to Africa and other Asian economies, the importance of setting up multilateral development banks or MDBs is another thing that India has always been pushing for, and that will be a very important part of the conversations at the G20 summit as well. So these two, I think, are sort of headliners as far as the economic outcomes possible from the G20 summit.
Absolutely, and a multilateral development bank, Rakesh, I think we can borrow from your wealth of knowledge. We need to have alternatives to big lending institutions that are largely hegemonized by Western powers, Western economies, and in a sense then you have developing economies that suffer not just with higher interest rates but also debt, huge massive amounts of debt, and in this case often the lender appears to be China, which is not making it but has a reason to not make it, because it's going to be uncomfortable conversation around debt restructuring for a lot of at least Asian economies that surround us.
Absolutely, but the problem is that China is not here, and whatever movement India wants to progress on this very, very important perspective, there is a veto by China. China is taking it in another direction. Right. China is colonizing the neighborhood, for instance, as I said, using debt as a geopolitical, geoeconomic weapon, and we are calling for a reform both from the Western perspective and also from the global South perspective, because we need far greater flexibility in terms of building that debt as a service rather than as a weaponizer, in terms of improving quality of life across the world. And there are benchmarks, there are discriminations. For instance, I keep pointing out this example. Sri Lanka, it took almost 3 years to get the $3 billion IMF package, that too with stiff conditionalities. But for Ukraine, they got it in 3 months. So because there is a vested interest in Ukraine.
Absolutely.
So it's not just China, Shweta. I think there are invested ideas in the Western economies, big ticket big ticket countries who are wanting to drive MDBs in a particular direction.
Right.
But there is also a collective failure at our end also. Look at BRICS. We discussed BRICS. There was a BRICS summit which I think Prime Minister also attended. The first and foremost tangible outcome of BRICS, to my mind, has been the new development bank. It was called BRICS Bank first. Now it got rechristened with KV Kamath as the founder, CEO of it, and MD of it. It was supposed to be a paddle or a mirror of an IMF. Early days, long way to go, but we must push more in that direction. Okay. But there again, the big ticket challenge or the big ticket perspective, whether China and India need to collaborate on the economic front given their political trouble on the border, or they continue to fight on each and every inch.
Absolutely. Whether they should fight, whether give up. I mean, at this juncture, I think the most important thing to discuss is that curtains are already rolling on what's going to be a mega event starting tomorrow. All eyes will be on India. India's moment is here. It has arrived. Whether there'll be a joint communique or not, India will pass on the baton to Brazil, which is going to be the.
But in terms of the intent,
right.
joint communique anyway will be there.
Absolutely.
But, I don't think it'll be a closure.
Right. And whether there's every participating country will agree on it or not. Just as it happened in case of Bali, there was no agreement for that matter on the joint communique, but the baton will now be passed.
It went on for a few days before they could even arrive at that final communique, if I remember correctly.
We
it took them about 3 days to arrive at the final communique.
We have a challenge in terms of the ongoing war, so that's casting a shadow even without the two members being there.
Absolutely. So lots of geopolitical interest there, but we will of course keep bringing you all the details right here on News 9 starting tomorrow morning.